Many different forces in China demanded dialogue. Chinese regime is the one party denying all dialogue. That needs to be known to the world.
In June of 1989, after weeks of mass demonstrations, hunger strikes and failed negotiations between student protesters and the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party declared martial law. On the night of June 3rd, troops were sent onto the streets of Beijing to forcibly end what the world now knows as the Tiananmen Square protests. Estimates of the death toll range from several hundred to several thousand, with thousands more injured. The events of Tiananmen Square remain one of the most consequential and censored moments in modern Chinese history. In this episode, we speak with Wu'er Kaixi, one of the most prominent student leaders of the 1989 Tiananmen Square movement. We met him in Taiwan in June of 2025 to discuss what it means to resist the power of the Chinese Communist Party, how exile has shaped his life, and what he believes the world still misunderstands about China today. Hello and welcome to Perspectives with Nilo, where we go beyond the headlines to examine how history, foreign influence and competing narratives shape modern democracies. I'm your host, Neil O'Sullivan. If this is your first time joining us on the podcast, we have over 80 past episodes. Recently, we covered such topics as Taiwan's history in relation to China, how China's influence in Ireland has shaped government behaviour, as well as the plight of the Uyghur people, and much more. You can find all of our past episodes by searching for Perspectives with Nilo on your favourite podcast app or on our blog site at pwnilo.com. That's pwnilo.com. And while you're there, we'd really appreciate your support. With so many podcasts available nowadays, it can be tough for smaller shows to break through. Hitting that subscribe or follow button goes a long way in helping us grow, and we truly appreciate it. It's not often that we get to interview someone who has fought for democracy in China and has lived to tell the tale. Wu'er Kaixi is a rare and persistent activist who played a lead role during the Tiananmen Square protests of 1989. He came to prominence as a student while studying at Beijing Normal University in the late 1980s, when he led the Beijing Students' Autonomous Federation. He is perhaps most famous for a televised meeting with then Chinese Premier Li Peng, where, dressed in hospital pyjamas and hooked up to an oxygen tank due to a hunger strike, he famously interrupted the Premier to demand a direct dialogue. After the Tiananmen Square protests, he escaped from China and ended up as the number 2 on China's most wanted list. He currently resides in Taiwan and remains a vocal critic of the Chinese Communist Party and a staunch advocate for human rights, particularly for the Uyghur community. In June of 2025, we met up with Wu'er Kaixi to examine the lasting impact of the 1989 Tiananmen Square movement, explore the personal cost of defying the Chinese Communist Party, and unpack what he believes many in the West still misunderstand about modern China and its political system. Kaixi, you're very welcome to the podcast. Thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure.
And maybe just to start, for people who mightn't know you, can you introduce yourself just briefly?
Certainly. I guess when come to self-introduction, the first first phrase that I come up to introduce myself is that I was the student leader of the Chinese democracy movement in 1989, better known as the Tiananmen student movement. I think people would remember, if it's not that long ago, 30-some years is a long time, but the tank man image is one image that kind of defined the last century. Yes. So, and then if people remember the tank man, they can probably remember like there was a major movement come along with that. The tank man incident took place on the very last day, June the 4th, when the Chinese government decided to finally respond to that mass people's movement demanding freedom and democracy in China with military force, with tanks. That one man standing in front of a column of tanks became the image representing that movement. I was the leader of that student movement. I was a student leader. I was the founder of that movement, hunger strikers. And then the Chinese government have also decided to recognize my effort by putting me on the most wanted list. I became number 2 on the most wanted list. And I'm a Uyghur. And that kind of, Uyghur is a phrase that becoming more and more familiar to the world these days. I would say maybe 5 years ago, very few people have heard of this term. Uyghur is a Turkic ethnic group, occupy huge land area in China, 1/6 of the massive China territory is occupied by this autonomous region called Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region in the northwest of China. We speak different languages, believe in different religion, with a complete different historical memories of who we are. We're not Chinese. We're occupied by Chinese. We're colonized by the Chinese. Then people didn't know that Chinese do that. Well, how about Tibetan? Oh yeah, we know about Tibetan. We heard about Tibetan because we heard about Dalai Lama. Same idea. Just they are Tibetans, they're Uyghurs, they're also Southern Mongolian, there are many different other ethnic groups occupied and then colonized by the Chinese. It just seems China is so far away, and then being the communist Chinese regime, people kind of put it in the second level of trying to understand who the Chinese regime really is, second from Soviet or the Eastern European communist countries. China is just one of those baddies. Let me put it in a easier term for people to understand. Chinese communist regime is just one of those evil regimes. And then I'm a Uyghur origin, and then I was a college student in Beijing Normal University.
And you were born in Beijing, were you?
I was born and raised in Beijing, yes. But in year 1989, I was a freshman in Beijing Normal University, one of the top university in China. And then I emerged I was a founder of the student movement. I was founder of the later hunger strike. I was in the front line of every demonstrations. So the student movement lasted about 50 days, started from middle of April, when the news of a former General Secretary of the Communist Party, Hu Yaobang, who is much more sympathetic to the freedom demand within China, when he was removed from his power and who later on died in April of 1989, that sparkled the student movement and ended on the June the 4th, 1989. Two major historical events took place that day in the world. One in Beijing, the Chinese government sent in their military troops to invade their own capital and basically suppressed peaceful demonstrators with hundreds, if not thousands, we still don't know the exact death toll, people killed. So that's one major historical event took place that day in the world. The other one took place in Warsaw, Poland, in June 4th, 1989. Solidarity movement won their first democratic election. Poland became democracy from that day on. That day is the milestone for Poland. So two very opposite directions took place. But I was the student leader in 1989 in China. And then later on, I was put on the most wanted list. The government really wanted me. I have to flee country. And then I have been living in exile after that. And then a good part of my time in exile I spent here in Taiwan. I became an organic part, a member of this society. Take some pride to say that I became a celebrated political commentator. I would love to believe that sometimes I was an opinion leader in the society and took my part of contribution to help Taiwan's democratization. So and Taiwan is my home in the last 30 years. So that's who I am. I'm a Chinese dissident living in exile here in Taiwan.
And Taiwan is a beacon of democracy, especially in this part of the
Absolutely.
world, and actually scores very high on the democracy indices and surveys that are carried out. It's come a long way in these past 30 years, even though it's probably going through a little bit of turbulence at the moment. What do you make of the current political situation in Taiwan?
Yes, Taiwan is a beacon of democracy and freedom. That was my sentence that I said quite a few times when I go around the world. And then usually agreed upon by my friends in democracies, like in the United States or in France, United Kingdom, like the cradle of democracies or the flagship of democracies. They would all agree, yes, Taiwan is the beacon of freedom and democracy in the Chinese-speaking world, this part of the world. That's no longer the case. I changed my narrative in the last 10 years. Taiwan is no longer just the beacon of democracy in the Chinese-speaking world. Taiwan is now the exemplary democracy in the whole world, including and surpassing those old democracies, the flagship, the cradle of democracies. And then I can give you a few examples to easily prove that Taiwan is becoming, other than the index released by very authoritative NGOs like Freedom House, like Reporter Without Borders, to report. For instance, Reporter Without Borders, that I am closely associated with, have reported Taiwan being number one in the in Asia Pacific for its press freedom index, and then in the global scale, it has surpassed France, where Reporter Without Borders is based in. United States, it has ranked very high in the press freedom, and I think you would get that idea here in Taiwan if you ask anybody here in Taiwan. I'm a political commentator here in Taiwan, a celebrated one, let me again brag about that. And then every time when I get into a taxi, whatever country you're living in, taxi drivers are the most active, vivid political commentators. I'm sure you would agree with me.
Absolutely, yeah.
On that one. Then and then the taxi drivers would argue anything that they heard me speaking on either the TV talk show or radio talk show. But the funny part is, every time toward the end of the conversation, the taxi driver would say, "But you are entitled to your opinion. You have the right to your opinion. I may disagree with you, but you are entitled to your opinion." Almost every time when a taxi driver wants to get into a political debate with me, they will say that. That gives us a good indication what Taiwan is. It's a very, very free country.
And people feel free and empowered to speak openly.
And then very proud of that.
Yeah. And do you think they value their democracy also?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They're very proud of that. And then I think, like there are a few democracies here in Asia.
Yeah.
Japan is a democracy, but basically architected by General MacArthur and the U.S. occupying forces after the World War II victory. And then South Korea, after the Korean War, they were almost like also architected and designed by the American. There are other democracies here in the countries, but you can clearly see there are some legacy issues. Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines. But Taiwan's democracy is, first of all, it's organic. It's not implanted. It was not forced to. And then we earned it. We have come a long way to earn and embrace this democracy. And then I can report to you now that we are ready to defend it, to die for it.
And it's under threat, right?
Oh,
at
yes.
the moment, much
in the
more
front
so.
line. And
Yeah.
then all democracy are under threat. I think American would, if there are listeners of this podcast and that from the United States, they will nod their head and say, yes, democracy is under threat, even in a country like ours. Yes, but then the threat to Taiwan is very imminent, and then it's military. It's very literal. Over 1,000 missile warhead is pointing at Taiwan. So when we say we're under threat, we mean it. Get an idea about we are under threat. We're in the front line, 1,000 missile warhead pointing at us because we are democracy.
And I suppose there aren't many people I've met who have sat and sat face to face with the CCP, with senior members of the Chinese Communist Party, and had conversations. So, as a student leader, you sat face to face with pretty senior CCP leaders of the Politburo and so on. I really want to know, what was that like? And as you kind of, represented the students, presenting your case for democracy, what was the reaction you got? I mean, did you get any insight? It's a while ago, so maybe it's different people in the CCP now. And we can talk about how it might have changed in a while. But back then, what was the kind of sense or feeling you got in terms of how they looked at democracy and what you were trying to achieve?
Well, okay, we were naive, for sure. We were brought up in China by the Communist Party. The word democracy, even though it wasn't a taboo, but it was under a very strict and ill interpretation by the Communist Party. Most of our knowledge of democracy comes from the very lack of it. We also brought up by the communists to say that we know how brutal they can get. Still, by the end of the 80s, when the student movement took place, we were under this illusion that the Communist Party are on our side also want modernization and open and reform, which is the slogan introduced by Deng Xiaoping at that time, for China. So we are probably getting a little ahead of ourselves, but we and the communist regime were on the same side. We want China's modernization, which include democracy and civil society, all these things. And then the answer to our naivete is clear. It's military crackdown, real ammunition, tank rolling over the peaceful demonstrators. So our naivete was waken up overnight. And then after I have to leave country, to fled the country, and then traveling around the world, keep telling people you cannot be too naive about this country, this regime. And still I see today the regimes, the world, let me use that word, the world. But basically I mean the United States-led Western democracies. That would be a more specific meaning when I say the world. Have this naivete about China based on a lot of reasons contribute to this. For instance, the United States decided to adopt this pro-China policy in the late 70s, basically through the brokerage of Henry Kissinger, who for some reason, he himself clearly admitted the pro-China policy is for national interest. There is no moral foundation for it. That he admitted that before his leaving this world.
But wasn't there a thinking, though, that especially in the Clinton era, that by making trade connections with China, supporting economic growth and engagement, that they would get a taste for capitalism and it would empower the middle class and democracy might emerge?
We the Tiananmen student, the democracy protesters, we had our illusion, we had our delusion. Of course the West would have their delusion, even to justify their past mistake. I mean, the United States have decided to follow through the Kissingerism, where Kissinger was still playing an important role in Washington, D.C., and then especially through his followers in the State Department, in the Washington establishment. They have a strong impact in Washington, D.C., to continue the pro-China policy. For God's sake, when the 1989 student movement took place, George Bush was the president of the United States. He was sent as the U.S. representative to Beijing before they established the formal diplomatic relation before the Carter era. So senior Bush president was a very pro-China policy holder. And then 2 months within the Tiananmen Massacre, they sent in a special envoy to Beijing, basically to tell Deng Xiaoping, well, we really cannot agree with you killing peaceful demonstrators. It's just very different from our country, and then we are a country of democracy. We have our parliament, we have academia, and we have media. We have to condemn you, but business as usual. When United States send this message, basically the Europe, Japan, Australia have to follow, because the United States say we're going to keep engaging with you. And then, like you said, during the Clinton era, they decide to bring China into this world economic system under major delusion that if we bring China into this world globalism economy, that will boost China's capitalism, will give birth to a large scale of Chinese middle class, which will give birth to a civil society, which will give birth to democracy. I call it three delusions.
Yes.
They are delusions because simple. It's not just illusion. It's delusion. It's wrong. It never happened. It will not happen. Capitalism, globalism, and then the implanted Chinese authoritarian capitalism have helped China economic boost, but didn't give birth to middle class. It gave birth to a authoritarian technocrat class. It made top 200 family of the communist regime very rich. It didn't give birth to a Chinese middle class. And it certainly didn't give birth to a civil society. When the Chinese have a tight control of media, press freedom, and then blocking all the paths to, let's say, free elections, things like that, the civil participations. So the civil society was not born in China, and democracy was certainly snipped from the very beginning, and then that enriched Chinese regime have turned their direction of the state development into a strong authoritarian police force to snip anybody that's just tempting to lead China into democracy.
Yes. And I mean, we just commemorated the 36th anniversary of Tiananmen Square.
Yeah.
And I suppose it still is the same party that's in power in China back then as it is today. But in your mind, does it seem like Western governments are getting any wiser that this illusion or delusions, these three delusions, that the Communist Party is not going to change?
Yeah,
and
well,
that's it.
One phrase that I have been telling our friends in democracies in the world is that I told you so. Well, a few years ago, 6 years ago, on the 30th anniversary of Tiananmen Massacre in year 2019, I was invited by the United States Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, Congressional Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, and then Executive Congressional Committee on China to give a speech in the Capitol Hill. And then I remember how I started it. I say, well, 30 years ago, I managed to escape from China. I was invited to come to this chapel of democracy under the invitation of these groups. It gave me no pleasure to come back 30 years and tell you I told you so. I started with this, and then I remember by the end of in 1 hour testimony, and then I said, you United States have betrayed democracy, betrayed us, and then with your wrong China policy, and then you will be much better off consulting criminologists instead of consulting so-called sinologists or international relation experts when forming your China policy. And now you have you have enabled this monster becoming an existential threat to the civilization you have earned in the last centuries.
Yeah. And you also said, I think, in that whole kind of talk that, engagement with China is the same as appeasement.
Yes. That's the word that the first time I used the word, I tried to introduce the word appeasement to criticize the Western China policy from the very beginning. But it's like in modern days, if you engage into international policy debate, the first person mentioned Hitler lose. So no matter when I try to use the word appeasement, the Western democracy will be like, no, you cannot use the word appeasement. You cannot compare China with Hitler. Well, I successfully made it a case when 2008, a Nobel Peace Prize committee have decided to award the Nobel Peace Prize to Liu Xiaobo. And then I was invited to go to the ceremony in Oslo. On my way, I stopped over in London. BBC invited me to their flagship talk show. On their talk show, and then I decided to, and then I think it's a perfect platform on BBC to introduce the word appeasement. And then at the same panel, they invited a former UK ambassador to China, and then a Chinese scholar who was, I think, in exchange. I think she's studying in Cambridge, but she was invited to be there, sort of speaking on behalf of the Chinese side. And then I think it's a good opportunity. So I said the Western world have long held appeasement policy. It's a very sensitive word to mention in UK and on BBC. And then it was so sensitive to the former ambassador. He gave me one of the longest no I have heard. No.
But I have to say that it does seem that any criticism of China in a lot of Western countries is not okay nowadays.
No. I mean,
so
it's changing a little bit in the last 3 years. I think last 3-4 years. I think the pandemic played an important role. Well, to finish that story, no worry. Just in that talk show, when the ambassador gave me this very long no, the talk show host says, like, why not? Why cannot we use the word appeasement? I mean, we learned, at least this country should have learned from history about our mistake of being appeasement. At this time, that Chinese lady, who was like an exchange scholar in the Cambridge, she stepped in and said, yes, I mean, this is a wrong word to use, appeasement, because the world need to learn how to cooperate with a rising force. And I was like, see, she just defended Hitler. And then the ambassador is like, yeah, that is defending Hitler. That would be a defending Hitler against the appeasement debate in the 40s in United Kingdom. So she helped me win that debate. The word appeasement has been used much more frequently in the last 10 years, although unfortunately the Nobel Peace Prize to Liu Xiaobo did not mark a clear end of appeasement. What I think is doing is the pandemic that took place in the last 5 years, I would say, 3-4 years. I used to often warn the Western world, before you know this threat to existential civilization we have achieved in the last 2 centuries is very imminent. It's on our corner. It's on our street. It's in our city already. And then the American realized, no, it's in our living room. Our family members are dying, and then we are putting masks on our faces because we have ignored this threat. So In the last few years, when I was in Washington, D.C., and I went there quite a few times, I all of a sudden, for the 30-some years being a lobbyist against the Western appeasement China policy, was really hard for me to get an audience. But in the last 5 years, in Washington, D.C., it's become easier and easier. I'm happy to see that change. It's a good sign. And then I start to travel around the world, even go to Europe and tell my friends there and say, you know what? U.S. is changing their direction again. You want to follow up, like you had to follow when Clinton decided to engage with China. If you do not follow, America will be the sole party take all the advantage of engaging with China's economy. So you had to follow. Now U.S. is getting off that train. You want to follow too. If you don't, you will be the one stuck with the check in the party. That's my message to our friends in Europe. Interestingly enough, I'm getting more head nodding in Europe than before too.
What do you think is it that makes the Chinese Communist Party so formidable? I mean, is it their information control? They've built up a huge military now. They have huge economic strength. Can you give us any insight based on your experience in China?
Okay. Firstly, definitely not military build-up. Yes, Chinese regime have been spending so much money on building up its economy, on its military, and then the percentage of GDP and everything goes to the level high enough to warn, to intimidate a lot of its neighbors, India, Japan, Korea. So worried that China is spending so much on its military. But I'm from China, let me tell you, the last time the People's Liberation Army won a war was in 1989 against the peaceful and then hunger strikers, students. After we stayed starving for 6 days. We were very weak. So at that time, the PLA won. They charged into the Tiananmen Square, and then they won. That was the last time PLA won anything. And they can manage to do a very, very good peace step. That's probably better than North Korea. They may have a competition there, but that's about it. So nothing to really worry about China's military building up.
You think it's a paper tiger?
Paper tiger is still a tiger. Let's not just... it is still a threat, for sure. And especially here in Taiwan, let's not also go to the other extreme to say there's nothing to worry about. That is also wrong. Well, Chinese military, is it formidable? First of all, I think paper tiger is not the right word that I would choose. The word that I have been choosing to describe Chinese military force is big bully. We all have experienced here or there, little or more, about bully. I did personally when I was in junior high school. There is a big bully, for some reason, always like to pick me up. And then one day I got fed up enough, and then I decided to fight back. Funniest thing happened. The guy has probably a head over me, and then just can easily pick me up, and then he was crawling into a corner, start crying. And then it became a very strong memory in my mind, and I realized, against big bully, all you need to do is stand up and say, I'm not afraid of you. That's strong enough. And then if you actually are not afraid, that gives you extra strength. So the world have no reason to be afraid of, have a very good reason to tell China we are not afraid of you, and then you will be so amazed how much power saying just that can give you.
There's a lot of countries in the world, like Ireland, where China and the CCP doesn't get a lot of day-to-day coverage, unless there's some escalation or something. And of course, the language barrier plays a big part in that as well. But in Ireland, a lot of people may think that, China is geographically far away from us.
Yeah.
They have a different culture. We should just, it's none of our business. We just should, leave them alone.
Yeah.
And then there's other people, a different cohort, who think that, and one politician in particular who has said that, China has never dropped a bomb on anybody for the past 40 years, and we should stop demonizing them.
Huh.
So what would you say to those kind of two positions? One, just ignore them. They're nothing to do with us. And two, well, they're a peaceful country for all intents and purposes. They haven't dropped bombs on anybody.
Okay, 40 years. Okay, probably. The last time China dropped a bomb in a foreign soil, I think, took place in 1979 in Vietnam. And then in the last 40 years, after Vietnam, the only military action they took was against us in 1989, Tiananmen. And then they realized they can just start locking people up without killing them or dropping bombs. Maybe not dropping bombs, but they have certainly managed to lock up hundreds, thousands, or hundreds of thousands of dissidents, or people just belong to different ethnic groups. Uyghur people, Tibetans. How about Hong Kongers? Hong Kongers, okay, yes, after 1997 it become part of China. British give it back to China, but Hong Kong, before that, the Western world have considered Hong Kong as one of us, right? Yes, there is an official handover, but Hong Kong is supposed to be one of us. If the world map was drawn in two colors, one color represents the freedom, the other is not freedom countries, then Hong Kong just changed color under the communist regime. And then the communist regime is the very party responsible for changing that color. It's not that different from, if I were in United States, I would say, you just lost Los Angeles. Or in Germany, I would say, hey, how about you lost Hamburg? Something like that. So I would say it's not that different. So no, Chinese regime, and then they lock up 1 million Uyghur people. 1 million. Not a million, millions of, maybe more than that. In 21st century, under the broad daylight. How did that happen? Because you decide to turn a blind eye on it. You decided it's a country far away. You decided those 3 delusions that Bill Clinton had continues. You believe that the delusion is that it's going to give birth to a civil society, give birth to a democracy. And then the other delusions is that, yes, we understand we are enabling, we are helping building a totalitarian regime, but there will be consequences, but the consequences will be within their own borderline. So the Tibetans, well, too bad for them. Uyghurs, we never heard of them. Now we have. Okay, they're ethnic Islamic people, very different. They even look more European than Chinese. Millions, it's a little too much, but then still it's within Chinese border. Is it really? For instance, the currency control is not within Chinese border. And Chinese can manipulate their currency control, reach into your pocket easily. Hackers attack. That is not confined within the borderline. Hong Kong, it was, okay, no, I just said Hong Kong was ours, and now we just decided to draw the border more close to us to include Hong Kong in China, to lose Hong Kong without complaining about it. How about pandemic? How about virus? How about lying about it? How about one day Chinese decided to invade their capital again because there are people taking a peaceful demonstration again, and then the Chinese government says, we're going to do it again, what we did 36 years ago, and this time we want you to endorse us doing so. When I say you, I mean you, the Western democracies. This time, it's within our border, it's none of your business, And then that's what Chinese government have been saying in the last 30 some years. You do not interfere with our own internal politics. So do you have to give in next time when they decide to, let's say, crack down peaceful demonstrator or invade Taiwan?
We mentioned earlier you were born in Beijing. Do you still have family there? If I may ask?
My family were in Xinjiang these days. My parents were brought to Beijing in the early days of the People's Republic to work for the language translation department, because Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region was newly formed, and then Uyghur language became one of the government language, official language. So a lot of government documentation need to be translated to Indo-Uyghur language. So they formed this bureau of, they call it Central Minority Publishing House. So my parents was brought into Beijing to do that job. My father was even took the job in the party's congress to translate for Mao Zedong to the Uyghur delegations. So, but in the 80s, my parents says, no, this is exile. We want to go back. So in the 80s, we moved back to Xinjiang, my parents. So I spent my high school years in Urumqi, came back to Beijing for university. But yeah, so the situation in China, we know both from the Beijing perspective and then from the Uyghur perspective.
But I guess you've tried to visit your parents in China, which seems like a very brave move, wanting to enter China. Can
Year
you speak
2009, that marks the 20th anniversary of Tiananmen Massacre. It also marks 20 years of exile for me. It has an impact, psychological impact for someone who has been in exile for 20 some years. And I've been thinking that since then. I say, what kind of impact it would have for His Holiness the Dalai Lama for being in exile for so long. I mean, it certainly did have a major impact for me in the year 2009 when I realized I will be in the third decade after the massacre anniversary day. So what do? Stay in exile maybe forever? I want to go back. So I made the decision to turn myself in the year June 4th, year 2009. I'm a Taiwanese citizen at that time, by then, and then I hold a Taiwanese passport. With Taiwanese citizenship and passport, it's impossible to travel to China without applying for a travel permit, except going to Macau, which is it's a special administrative region of China. I mean, Macau is already handed over back to China, but Macau is a gambling city. They welcome Taiwanese to go there, and then so gave Taiwanese people a special status of a visa waive status, that with a Taiwanese passport, I can actually travel to Macau, the special administrative region of the People's Republic of China. So that's what I did. On the June the 3rd of 2009, I boarded an airplane, and then before that, I released a statement. The airplane take off. The statement was broadcasted through my friend's help, and in that statement, I said, "Well, I want to declare clearly that I am turning myself in, being a Chinese most wanted. Here I am." The reasons behind that is clear. 20 years ago, we started a business, and that business is unfinished business. I want to come home and continue that business. That business, we called it in 1989, clearly, we wanted dialogue. We still want it, even in the form of indictment and plea. Even in the Chinese court, I want that dialogue. Even if the dialogue is staged, I still want that dialogue directly with the Chinese regime. So that was the reason that I'm turning myself in as the Chinese most wanted. Other reasons including in year 2008, they arrested Liu Xiaobo, my mentor, my best friend, my advisor, and then Nobel Peace Laureate of China, the founder of 2008 Charter 08. And then he's in prison, and then I think the logical place for me, his apprentice, to be is next to him in Chinese prison. And then, of course, I miss my family, I miss my parents. I want to hold my parents to say I'm sorry. If I couldn't, at least I want to see them, even from behind the wall, I would love to see them. So that was in my statement, I stated the reason I'm turning myself in. And then I'm on the Chinese most wanted list. I'm supposed to be accepted when I turn myself in. Who knows, the most wanted person in that day become most unwanted. The Chinese government instructed the Macau administrative region to turn me away. So I was thrown onto the airplane and flew back to Taiwan on the second day. Spent the night in Macau detention center commemorating June 4th, 20th anniversary. So that's then. And then I tried another 3 attempts following that, 2010, 2011, and then 2012, through Hong Kong, through Japan. In Japan, I wanted to try to turn myself into the Chinese embassy. All failed. And then in the United States, too, all failed. Chinese decide to close their embassy door very tight. So most unwanted that I become.
But when you say you want dialogue, I mean, it's dialogue with a regime who don't listen, don't appear to be open to any other point of view.
No.
What's the point in doing that?
Well, see, they are not willing to dialogue is one thing. We are demanding dialogue is another. And then also we demand our dialogue also shows the world that they are the one party denying dialogue. And then when I say we, I include we, the Chinese democracy forces, Hong Kongers, Tibetan, Uyghurs, or let's say environmentalists in China, feminist movement. Many different forces in China demanded dialogue. Chinese regime is the one party denying all dialogue. That needs to be known to the world. That needs to be shown and demonstrated, and then that should become an obvious question. Whoever having access to have a dialogue with Beijing, where the Western world does, when you send a trade dialogue delegation to Beijing, you do have an opportunity to have a dialogue with Beijing. And then I do realize, for instance, I talked to my American friends. I say, you just send a trade dialogue delegation to Beijing. Why don't you raise the questions that we could not? And they said, we did. It turned out they did. They did raise the question of human rights. The problem is they never wait for an answer. And they never attach that answer to the trade. So the message they sent to Beijing is, you know what? Human rights is in our vocabulary. We have to care. We have to pretend we care about it, but we really don't. That's the message Beijing got. So that's the reason they lock up 1 million Uyghurs in the 21st century China. So the world owe it to Uyghur people. The world owe it to Hong Kong. The world owe it to Tibetan. The world owe it to the Chinese democracy.
Is it greed? Is it greed of the West that is the problem here?
It's coming along. It's not easy, because basically the next question they would ask is, then what do you want from us? Yeah. What would I want from you guys? Simple. Disengage from China. Do not let China believe that you need them as so much that they can get away from anything they do. So when China get a message to say, we don't need you as much as you need us, the Chinese will think again. The Chinese regime will think again. Okay, in that case, Do we still lock millions people just because of their ethnicity, their language, their background? We may get a serious sanction. Yeah, that's the message I want you send it to them. How do you send a message successfully? By following up with action behind it. So, but that's going to cost you. The one side effect of democracy is nearsightedness. The policymakers, decision makers of democracies do not look into a long-term interest. They look in 4 years until their next election. So that's the side effect of democracy. So that's the problem. And Chinese know that. Chinese regime knows that.
And they play the long game.
Oh, yes. This is a good time. You need to know your adversary. You need to know your enemy. They are playing your game well. You need to play their game well too. How to do that? Starting by not following their narrative, starting your narrative. That has been my message to my friends in democracy in the last decade.
That's Wu'er Kaixi, whom we spoke to back in June of 2025. And my sincere thanks to him for taking the time to share his valuable insights with us on Perspectives with Nilo. If you'd like to find out more about the topics discussed in this episode, we've placed additional information and links on our blog site at pwnilo.com. We'd also love to hear your feedback on our discussion. Do you think Western governments still suffer from misconceptions when engaging with the Chinese Communist Party? Drop us a comment on our Perspectives with Nilo social media pages or whichever app you use to listen to the podcast. You can also contact us via our blog at pwnilo.com. And if you enjoyed this episode and you don't want to miss any future episodes, don't forget to hit that subscribe or follow button. This is the best way to support us and really helps motivate us to keep producing content. But that's where we leave it for now. Thank you for listening, and until the next time, 再见.